Now, I'm going to venture a little bit into my my tinfoil hat perception of some things. So, as I was going through Midnight's update, on Twitter, and I did a video where I was breaking down all of the use case potential that's being discussed, that Midnight on Twitter has put out. I was actually kind of shocked, and I was shocked in that, what I was alluding to earlier is kind of your stance against kind of like a lot of the centralized control, the kind of globalist elite, blah, blah, blah. But then I as I'm reading through these things, I'm seeing a lot of use case potential that would supplement some of those efforts. And so my curiosity is, so in my mind, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, okay, Charles, I'm guessing Charles is seeing that some of the neglect, I think, from the general market, obviously some of that having to do with it being highly competitive against other projects, other chains, and their interest in pumping money into misinformation campaigns through paid articles and things of that nature. But then there's the other element to that basically says, well, we can't control Cardano, so we don't even want it in the conversation. But then if I were the spearhead of a particular blockchain, maybe I put some things out there that say, you know what, we're going to be so decentralized that these are some of the use case potential for governments and right. Maybe some of these elements that maybe they don't look so comfortable on the face, but maybe there's an ulterior interest or motive behind discussing those. And so I thought I would bring that up to see what you had to say about it.
Yeah, it's an important question. And I think what happens is that people just fundamentally misunderstand how privacy works and how one builds these types of ecosystems. So what ends up happening is that the minute you start talking about concepts like selective disclosure, escrow keys, these things, people say, oh, that must mean it's at the protocol level and there's a backdoor in Midnight. That's not true. Midnight does not have a backdoor. There is no escrow key, universal God mode inside the system. We do have those. Intel puts it through Intel Management Engine in your processor, and AMD puts it in, and Apple has backdoors, but we don't do that at the protocol level, okay? So full stop, there's no backdoors in Midnight. But here's how business works. Every business has a public side and a private side. Public side is what you reveal to the general public. We're McDonald's, we make hamburgers. Okay, great. Does McDonald's, your franchise, reveal how much you pay your employees, how much money's in the cash register, who's working, the schedule? That's private logic disclosed to the people within the organization. So the problem with the cryptocurrencies is they can't keep a secret right now. They can just give you the public side of things. So what we do in practice is we take all the private side and we sweep it into a centralized entity. That's what we do, which basically, because you need both to work, means you're not a blockchain application. It's been completely compressed into one central server. They pretend to be blockchain, but the private side is not. Midnight is the first time ever where you can design your business and your disclosure regime. Now, as design, you can have no disclosure regime. It's anonymous to everybody. Or you can build it in and say the escrow keys will go to HR or to the CFO or to a regulator or something like that. So here's an example, a security token. You have broker-dealer registration, you're a regulated product, you are a security, you're admitting you're a security. It's not like, hey, the SEC said so. No, you've actually decided to go down that road. It's a company, it has a promise, it has a centralized issuer. So we're saying that that company, even though they have a regulatory disclosure requirement, should not be able to interact with or have any view of the shareholders of the company. Wouldn't that violate law and statutory requirements and these types of things? So we're going to issue a security token, but be out of compliance with securities laws, in which case you're not legally allowed to trade it. And it's not valid. So what do? How do we bridge that gap? Well, you build a system that allows a person to do that. Now, is that protocol level, meaning Midnight has a backdoor that they've reached through? No, that's DApp level. You, for your token and your DApp, built that disclosure regime into it, and Midnight, the toolkit, enables you to do that easily. What does this translate to? Trillions of dollars of real-world assets work their way into the blockchain space that right now can't enter because blockchains are fundamentally incompatible with these types of things, but also allows you to innovate a little bit. So just yesterday, Uniswap got hit with a Wells notice. Well, if Uniswap could do everything differently, maybe they would want to create a regime where they blacklist U.S. participants so they wouldn't have to deal with the United States. So how do you do that? in an algorithmic and automated way as a dApp. Well, here's what you do. You have what are called non-creds and zero knowledge proofs. And what you do is before you can send money in, you have to provide a zero knowledge proof that you're not under US jurisdiction. You don't reveal who you are. You don't reveal any personally identifiable information. You're just revealing that you're not US citizen. Then you're allowed to freely trade with everybody. And Uniswap, the operators there, can prove to any regulator asked that there was never US participation or US customers involved in that trading. And this can be done in a completely automated way on chain. So you can have a regulated DEX that's still automated and it's still a smart contract, and you've blacklisted a particular domain. Business logic. Maybe you only want people trading in a marketplace who own your NFT. You could use the same logic for that. Maybe you want to have a disclosure regime where people who are members of your NFT get to see it. Or maybe you're a musical artist and you have super fans who buy all your albums and do things. Maybe they get private releases of music and everybody else doesn't get that and they can't see it. Well, that's a disclosure regime, right? So that's the point of Midnight, is to create a framework so that people can build that type of stuff and they have assurances that the disclosure logic that they've put down is ironclad. Super important for analytics as well. So I have a clinic in Gillette, Wyoming. We have 7,000 patients at Hoskinson Health. We have all their medical records. I'm not allowed to share those medical records, and I can't do anything with those medical records other than have them. Well, what if we could work with the patients and we could build a regime where we could have that data be analyzed and the patients could be paid for that, but in the analysis, none of their personal identifiable information gets released. A lot of pharmaceutical companies are interested in that. And if the patient can get basically free money and they know that there's no privacy concern there, a lot will say yes. And it creates mutual value on both sides. Okay, well, how do you do that? In a centralized way, you give all that data to Bob, you hope he's trustworthy, and you hope he doesn't steal it. With Midnight, you can do all of that on chain. And that entire regime's there. And you have math-based guarantees that your data can't be shared. But the semantical richness of it can be shared, and you get paid for that. And that can all be a smart contract. That's why we built this, is because that is real life use cases, whether it be carbon markets or supply chains or healthcare, it be automated regulation that exists with these applications. And you'll notice no government has a backdoor. The only time people can disclose is when the dApp developer decides who is the disclosure regime. They can say no one but the user. They can say the user and the dApp developer. They can say the user, the dApp developer, and Uncle Bob, who's the regulator. They can say whatever inside that. That's programmability, and that's the power of programmable privacy, is you can build these types of things and put them together. And as a consumer interacting with it, you get a math-based guarantee that what you see in the disclosure regime is the disclosure regime. The problem right now is you don't know. You give it to Google, and then Google shares it with the CIA or the NSA. You give it to Google, then Google shares it with the FBI or whoever, and you're never told that it's been shared. It just disappears in some end user license agreement, and we never know. Also, the problem is almost all these regulated business become inadvertently warehouses of data. So when you go and interact with an exchange, they have to do KYC and AML. And what does that mean? They know a lot about you, and they have to hold on to that for 7 years or longer. What if they get hacked? All your personally identifiable information gets leaked. With a system like this, settlement is compliance. So if you send your funds there, if it settles, you sent your funds with a bunch of zero knowledge proofs that proved properties. You know, for example, when you go to a bar and they say, hey, I want a drink. What do? They say, oh, show me your driver's license. So when you show it, you're not just proving your age. You're telling them your name, your address, whatever the hell else is there. A zero knowledge proof just proves a Boolean. Are you at or over the age of 21? That's it. So you play a game of 21 questions in this model. Are you under U.S. jurisdiction? Are you at this age? Are you Reg D exempt investor? Or this. Enough? Yes, it settles. There we go. Now, I, as the operator, I don't know anything but what I've asked. I don't know your name. I don't know your address. I don't know anything.
And your willingness to provide it.
Exactly.
That all makes sense to me, Charles, and I get all of that, especially when it comes to healthcare and the medical fields and things. But specifically, some of the things that I was referring to are well, and you just kind of gently brought it up, is enabling frameworks for verifying the tokenization of carbon credits, right? That I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Empowering organizations or governments to build ESG tracking platforms for customer feedback and participation, et cetera, which that one really threw me. So
well, let's talk about that. ESG. So let's say you're one of these eco hippies, you love battery power cars. Maybe, just maybe, you want to know the lithium in your battery power car was not mined by human slaves in Congo. there's the good part of ESG, there's a bad part of ESG, but that certainly is something I think the 99.9% of human beings would agree. We don't want to buy lithium mined by slaves in a country. So wouldn't it be nice that when you look at that, there's a proof that somewhere along the way, certain people have vouched for that supply chain that are credible transnational organizations to audit it and verified that child labor wasn't used, slave labor wasn't used, sex trafficking didn't happen, these types of things. Well, how do we normally do that? Normally, what has to happen is a hyper-invasive process begins and some transnational body comes in and they audit these organizations. And your ability to procure that audit basically determines whether you have market access or not. So what happens with those transnational bodies? They become too powerful. They can mandate terms to people in developing countries and basically tell them, hey, if I don't audit you, I don't give you this little stamp of approval, then you can't sell your products anymore in these places. So they end up becoming the kingmakers and they get monopolies off of ESG. Well, when you create marketplaces for this and you create a proof system, you can have much more diversity in your verification of claims. What ends up because of that, you break the centralization up and you have much lower cost to verify claims. It's the same with the textiles business. When they dye these shirts, man, they're devastating. You look at the cancer rates next to textile mills where they're processing fibers and they're dyeing fibers. You have such a 35-year-old people die metastatic brain cancer all the time and other things because there's so many carcinogens and toxins that exist in these things. So there's a global movement right now to prove that when you buy clothing, that clothing is sustainably produced and it doesn't kill people. The same for e-waste. So I want to live in a world when you buy a product, you can scan a QR code on that product and it tells you the story of it. That's what supply chain ESG is really about. Okay. And you can ask questions like, was this made by slave labor? Was this fair trade? Was this environmentally sustainable? These types of things. And you should be able to get answers to that. Some people care about the carbon, some people don't. But everybody's got something. But we see these preferences in ancient times too, right? Is it kosher? Is it halal? How was the food prepared? We as humans have asked these for thousands of years and we create systems for that. The problem in a global supply chain is sometimes you don't know. And when you don't know, it can hurt you. Look at the baby milk with lead that came out of China, and these other places. So we want to live in a world where when you scan something, you can know the provenance of it. You can know who touched it, what they did with it, and how they treated it. The only way you can live in that world is create a world where the disclosure of these things doesn't lead to monopolies and it doesn't lead to predatory business practices or competitive espionage. Apple does not want Samsung to know how many iPhones it's getting ready to build. Samsung doesn't want Apple to know what goes in their cell phones until after it's been released into the market. So when you have technology like this, you can prove properties of your technology, properties of your supply chain, but you don't reveal competitive stuff inside the supply chain. Does that make sense?
Yeah,